I'm Lisa Snowden McCrae, editor-in-chief of the Baltimore Beat, an independent paper here in Baltimore City, and you're watching the Real News Network. Here in Baltimore, police abuse and lack of accountability is again front and center. 2 officers were just found guilty of corruption in a trial where a dozen others were accused of wrongdoing. The mayor and other city leaders say they are just bad apples, but critics say the BPD needs to be disbanded and put under civilian control. Just before the trial, the police commissioner, Kevin Davis, was forced to step down, and a new commissioner, Darryl DeSousa, was just sworn in. To talk about all that, I'm here with Jill Carter, former Baltimore City delegate and current head of the city's Office of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement. She also just announced that she's running for state senate, so we'll also talk about that. Thanks for being here, Jill.
Thank you.
So I just mentioned in the intro the GTTF trials, and I think everybody pretty much couldn't keep their eyes off of it. So were you watching it? And if so, what are your thoughts on it?
I followed it primarily through the media reports every day. And, you know, I hate to seem as if I'm numb from allegations of police misconduct, but I was not surprised really by anything that I found out that came out of the trial. I wasn't surprised for a couple of reasons. I'd known for a long time that there were serious problems, individual and systemic, in BPD, Baltimore Police Department. In addition to that, I don't know how anyone could have been shocked because the Department of Justice report pretty much outlined a lot of issues of mistreatment of people and abuse by the police throughout Baltimore, and so it kind of goes hand in hand that there were that there wasn't just a few bad apples, that there were systemic problems in the Baltimore Police Department.
Now, your office is in charge of the Civilian Review Board, and I know that they are kind of in charge of handling civilian complaints against the police. So had you guys heard anything about these people that were charged, or had you had any complaints lodged against them?
Over the years, there had been several of the officers that were part of the gun trace task force that had complaints by the Civilian Review Board. In each case, even before my tenure, which has only been a year, my understanding is that the allegations, even where either were not sustained or they were, if sustained by the Civilian Review Board, they were never sustained by the IAD. And so I want to talk a little bit about that because, so one of the things that I don't think people fully understand is we have a completely 2-tiered system. There's internal investigations that the Baltimore Police Department does, and then the Civilian Review Board that has the ability to conduct investigations over just 5 small categories of cases. So we don't have the authority to just investigate any case. So, or even if, you know, sometimes something will happen on the news or it'll be on camera and people will ask, are you investigating it? We actually have to investigate cases only within our 5 categories and when a specific complaint is filed. Okay. So that being said, over the years, and including within my last year that I've been there, repeatedly the Civilian Review Board sustains complaints of misconduct against officers, and then the IAD does not sustain the complaint, and then there is no requirement on the part of BPD that they actually adhere to the recommendations or the suspensions of the Civilian Review Board. And so 99 times out of 100, the cases that the Civilian Review Board sustains against officers are completely ignored.
So what's the point? What's the point of the Civilian Review Board?
That is exactly my point. If we're not going to have authority, then there is no point. And so, another thing is that I really believe that this is something that could be a mere policy change on the part of BPD, and I'm actually hoping it's going to come out of the consent decree. You know, we're still very early in the process of the consent decree. I'm ready to zoom forward to the end because I know exactly what I want to have come out of it, but unfortunately we have to go through the process. The monitoring plan just got set up. You know, they're looking at policies. They've created something called a Civilian Oversight Task Force, which is charged with looking at our practices, looking at our policies, looking at our work, and figuring out how to make us more functional. And so certainly I think that will be one of many things that they would change, which is that if the Civilian Review Board sustains a complaint against an officer, that the Baltimore Police Department either has to adhere to that finding or, at the very least, give it weight in its ultimate decision and articulate any reasons it might have for straying from the decision, for ignoring this decision. I think that's critical. But I also think it's important to talk a little bit, because I think there's a lot of confusion around this, and I learn every day it's more complicated than I thought, too.
Yes.
But I want to separate what we do and this whole idea of civilian oversight or civilian review board, IAD, and trial boards.
Okay.
So, to clarify, trial boards happen in a minuscule number of cases. Trial boards occur only in cases where IAD sustains a finding against an officer, which is rare, and the officer then chooses a trial board. And the officer, even when a complaint is sustained, they have options. They can resign, they can retire, they can accept punishment, or they can negotiate a deal for a smaller punishment than what is offered.
And when they retire, I'm assuming they would still get like retirement payments, or
Absolutely, they do. So yeah, there's no penalty for an officer that retires, even in the wake of a sustained complaint. So that being said, trial boards happen very rarely and only when officers most likely believe that they can prevail or that a better deal wasn't offered such that they want to take their chances at a trial board. And so having civilians on trial board alone is not sufficient to really change anything because there's this two-tiered system. And so we have the civilian review board over here and then the trial boards. So even if we put civilians on the trial boards, or even I would argue, and I have suggested, that if we put civilians on trial boards, they should be members of the civilian review board. Put civilians on trial boards, that's still about less than maybe 5% of all cases, all allegations ever made against officers.
Okay. So what do you suggest? How do we fix that problem?
Thank you for asking me that question. How do we fix it? We fix it a number of different ways. One, we make it such that the Civilian Review Board, first of all, we change the name to make it an oversight authority. We give the Civilian Review Board and the Office of Civil Rights the authority and the power to oversee the operations, the policies, and the conduct of officers. We don't relegate it to 5 categories that, frankly, BPD has full discretion as to whether or not they will submit a complaint or determine whether or not it's within our jurisdiction. We need our own discretion to determine when complaints are within our jurisdiction. We also need to take away the requirements, these formalities about signing a complaint, swearing under oath, all of that, because these are all impediments to people filing complaints. And then also, the biggest deterrent to people filing complaints is fear. They're afraid of retaliation, and they're also afraid that even after they subject themselves to potential harm, there will be no result in their favor. And so I would say that there's some justification to that fear. And so in order to change that, we have to actually change the authority, and we have to change the way that the two agencies interact. We have to treat the Civilian Oversight Agency or Civilian Review Board in a serious way, as if we really do have the authority to determine what the conduct of law enforcement officers in the city of Baltimore should be. We can't keep leaving it up to BPD to police itself and to only rely on IAD.
Okay, so we have, like I mentioned in the intro, we have a new police commissioner, officially as of today of this taping, Darryl DeSousa. Some people have said that it seemed like he was kind of rushed through. There was kind of no need to kind of get somebody right away when we're looking at this, immense amount of corruption, but no matter what, he's here. So have you had a chance to talk to him, and what are your thoughts about?
I have, and I had a very good feeling about his commitment to changing a lot of what's wrong. He has offered that we should actually meet and try to figure out how to work together to fix some of the things. I felt like he might be the first commissioner that didn't give the impression that he wanted to just place the Civilian Review Board on the back burner. And that's important because I want to make it clear that even with the Department of Justice report, even with the consent decree, even with the independent monitor, all of that stuff is designed to make the Baltimore Police Department better. But then it says, okay, we're going to work on making the police department better, and then way over here, we're going to try to figure out how to give civilians a little bit more power too. But I think that we have to really work toward changing the thinking to make people that are within the law enforcement field and the policymakers understand that civilian review should not be at the back end, it should be at the top end. It should be all the way through.
I mean, for me, it just feels, as I guess a person who grows more and more cynical every day, Darryl DeSousa talked a really good game. He, at the hearing that City Council held, I think it was like the week before he was officially confirmed by the whole body, he said a lot of the right things. But once you get into power, it's kind of how likely you actually are to follow through. It's very easy for politicians and people of power to say, oh, yes, definitely. Like, is there any way that we can, like, guarantee that he does these things, that he's kind of assured you that he cares about?
Well, you know, the Office of Civil Rights doesn't have that authority, but I will say that I think that the people are watching very closely, and I think that people were watching this hearing in a way that they've never really watched it before. On the heels of the DCF trial, on the heels of the consent decree, I think people are tuned in a way they never were before. So I actually have, and we have to, honestly, I have high hopes for Commissioner DeSousa, and I think it's better to operate that way, to expect the best, present what you think should be changed, and give them the option to do it, to make it happen, rather than just assume the worst, that, oh, it's not going to change. I feel like, given all that we've been through, he understands his responsibility and his obligation. Now, there are some things I'm certain, because of he's been in law enforcement, that he doesn't know. That's up to us, the people, the public, to educate him about it.
One more thing I want to throw into the mix, and we can kind of wrap up this segment, is I think the mayor has kind of floated the idea of making it easier to fire police officers, which on the surface seems fine. Do you have any takes on that? Do you think that's a good idea?
So I think that I appreciate the intent of it, and I certainly think it's a step in the right direction. The only thing that I would hope that we could have a conversation, since we're talking about final authority, is the concept of weaving in the civilian review board's opinions and decisions within that final authority. If we're going to talk about altering final authority, we should talk about altering the final authority in cases that involve the civilian review board as well. And until some years ago, the police commissioner did have that authority. But I want to also be mindful of where that still may fail us, which is that the commissioner can only make that decision again once there's been a sustained finding.
So we go all the way back to the initial.
So if we can't rely upon IAD to sustain findings against officers, all we really have is a civilian review board. Now, I will grant you that there's been a new chief of IAD that's been put in place, and she's a female black officer, and so I know that we and many people have high hopes that she's going to kind of revamp and change the way they operate, so let's hope so. But at the end of the day, all of the changes, all of the reforms, all of the resources put into the BPD without also simultaneously ensuring that there's greater civilian oversight, I think all of it will not be adequate without that.
We've been talking to Jill Carter, head of Baltimore City's Office of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement. Join us for part 2.